Duffy, Chairman of our Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, panel. I missed some of the first part of your testimony. I was at a transatlantic group meeting with some of the elected officials from the European Union, which makes me think that our U.S. regulatory system is becoming more like the European regulatory system, where we have a one-size-fits-all paradigm, which I don't think actually works very well. So just quickly, 22,000 pages of new regulation in Dodd-Frank. Does anyone on the panel think that this is going to stop too big to fail, Dodd-Frank? Mr. Newell, you do?
Yes, I do. I would point to two things. First, more generally, and it's often overlooked, the substantial increase both in the capital and liquidity position of the largest banks at first made it much less likely that they would fail. And second, we now have today both the legal and operational framework that will assure that even the largest bank can be resolved in an orderly fashion without posing risk to the taxpayer or to the financial system more broadly.
Okay, and I would just note that I think your position is even disagreed with by my friends across the aisle, Democrats. I mean, it's been a bipartisan issue that too big to fail hasn't ended. This is not just a Republican issue. Even Democrats admit that their bill hasn't ended too big to fail. It's become a common talking point from the left. Elizabeth Warren still talks about too big to fail. And so if Dodd-Frank was the end of it, you're even in disagreement with some of the Democrats who agree that they haven't accomplished that goal, which was the auspices for this massive new regulation. We had bank failures. Taxpayers bailed them out. Americans were angry, and so Democrats said, let's end too big to fail, and this is the bill that's going to do it. Massive new regulation, but actually doesn't resolve the problem that they set out allegedly to fix. So I think it's pretty unique. Mr. Henscheling's bill here has a little bit different approach, giving banks a choice to hold more capital in exchange for less regulation. And the debate today is, as you're seeing break down, is between regulators and capital. Can regulators stop the next crisis, or can capital stop the next crisis? Did regulators fail in the last economic crisis of '08, Mr. Pollack?
Yes, without doubt, not only in this country,
but around the world. Mr. Allison?
Absolutely, they failed, and I do not believe we've solved the too big to fail problem. I think today, under the exact same circumstances, the regulators today would act to save the big
Mr. Nussel?
They shouldn't, but they would.
Yeah, I mean, so our model, because it's locally controlled and members manage this, it's inherently more conservative. And so I think it's not only a failure generically of regulators and I suppose policymakers, having been one of them myself, but it's also, I think, a failure of the way we do business. If, in fact, the chairman's right that we're trying to balance the need for growth with inherent risk, assuming that one entity in Washington can manage all of that without the involvement of consumers, without the involvement of real people and the market making that decision, I think that's inherently problematic. So I think it's more than just a failure of the regulators in that instance.
But regulators are human, right?
Correct.
Humans make errors. And whether you're a regulator or a banker, you will make mistakes. And the way you blunt those mistakes is holding more capital. Is that a fair assessment, Mr. Pollack?
yes, it is. It's so fair that I say it in my written testimony.
That is very well said. I only have a minute left. So quickly, would Mr. Allison, would you agree that banking regulations increased from '97 to '08?
Oh, yes. Banking regulation increased exponentially. It was things like the Patriot Act and the Privacy Act and Sarbanes-Oxley. And you can count the pages. There was a massive increase in regulation. There was no deregulation of the banking industry. That is an absolute myth.
So even with more regulation, we still had the failure. And I think that point needs to be made. One of my concerns is risk weighting. Is it fair to say with risk weighting that through regulation we'll consolidate risk not just in one bank but across the banking sector? So mortgage-backed securities, we say they're safe, or today we'll say that government debt is safe, causes systemic potential risk throughout the whole banking system, Mr. Pollack.
I think that's true, and I think a wonderful example, which we haven't mentioned today, is the risk weighting applied to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac under the U.S. capital standards, in which their debt and even their preferred stock were given extremely low capital risk weightings and induced an excess flow of credit with disastrous results.
Well said, and I think diversification across the industry, which is outside then risk weighting, would make a lot of sense to make sure we don't have systemic failures in the future. My time is up. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair